Good morning, and distinguished guests. Thank you, Mayor Mardella, for inviting me. It's really an honor, and it's inspiring to be standing up here and talking about urban innovation in a place that's been leading urban innovation, I think, for the past nearly 1,000 years. And I'm just passing away the time till my presentation comes up. This is actually the second time that I've been scheduled right after the Makoko presentation, which is really challenging because I can't really have any good examples that even begin to compare with that presentation. And I'm still waiting for my presentation. Anyway, I'll start. So as I said, I come from the city of Tel Aviv, which is a much younger city than Florence. By about 800 years. The city of Tel Aviv just celebrated its 100th birthday several years ago. And I think I've been invited because we are succeeding in creating a possibly unique combination of innovation and civic engagement, together with cooperation between the academy, Tel Aviv University, where I come from, and the municipality. And although I think we're still doing very modest initiatives, I would like to share these with you and also share with you the Tel Aviv Declaration for Civic Engagement in a Smart City, which is part of the Quito of the new urban agenda policy lines, which were presented last week in Quito in Ecuador as part of Habitat 3. So, as I said, my name is Orli Ronen. I come from Tel Aviv University. I established the Tel Aviv University's, or the Portis School, Urban Sustainability and Innovation Lab about 2 years ago. And its main purpose is to take down the concepts of sustainability and resilience and translate them into tangible, practical practices that municipalities can adopt and implement. I would like to share with you some of our insights and experiences as we travel through this very interesting and challenging road. But I would like to begin, as all my predecessors, with the context, where we're at, and why are we talking about sustainability and resilience and innovation at this particular time? As you already heard, yes, urban communities are now more or less taking part in 2% of the world landscape, housing more than 50% of the population, producing about 70% of the economic growth, and unfortunately also emitting about 80% of the greenhouse gas emissions. And our own perspective in Tel Aviv is that since we have very, very limited land resources, our urban communities occupy about nearly 7% of the land. More than 91% of the population live in urban communities. They produce about 81% of the GDP, and yes, they also produce about 90% of greenhouse gas emissions. And looking at these figures, we first of all try to understand what is the impact and what is the need for change for the city of Tel Aviv and for the country of Israel in general. Tel Aviv is not a large city. It is possibly one of the secondary cities of the world. It has less than 500,000 people residing in it. Also, about 1 million people enter it daily as commuters for employment, for culture, for education. It also has about 13 kilometers of coastline, which is definitely an upcoming challenge in the coming years. looking at questions of climate change and coastal degradation. And also we have around 50,000 refugees, mostly from Eritrea and South Sudan. And the reason why there is a question mark with this number is that they're not registered, and this is only an estimate. Some people say 150, and there are even estimates as to 250,000 some days in Tel Aviv. These are the challenges that the city of Tel Aviv has to face, and although I'm not going to go into all of them, I would like to bring you a very modest and simple perspective on these big challenges, the perspectives of local actions, mostly implemented on the local neighborhood street level. We began by looking at Tel Aviv by trying to understand Tel Aviv impacts in terms of the ecological footprint model. I would suggest that this model helps us translate the big ideas into practical and quantitative qualities of the relationship between a city, a country, and its ecosystem. And as you can see, Tel Aviv, the large majority of Tel Aviv's imprint is due to food, to transportation of food, to production of food, to consumption of food, etc. This was really a very surprising finding. We did not expect food to have such a large impact on the ecosystem. After that, electricity, which actually is translated into electricity in building, followed by materials, transportation, and then the actual city area. Now you may ask, what's the meaning of all these numbers? Well, first and foremost, it means that if every person in the world lived like an average Tel Avivian, we would need 3.5 planets. But it also means this is the basis for the city policy. Looking at these numbers, at these figures, how does the city intend to decrease its ecological footprint? The city itself has joined the Milan Compact for Sustainable Food last year, and also has been the first city to adopt the Israeli Green Building Standard as a mandatory standard for building in Tel Aviv. So these are just the first steps as we look at the point of resilience as the coming together of questions of smartness, civic management, and sustainability, bringing us to how do we produce urban resilience that also produces, and I'd really like to stress this, that also produces well-being and a good life for our citizens. Cities are being challenged. A resilient city has to become the engine to bring these three together, creating the climate for involvement and innovation, facilitating processes, and the platform. The challenge for future cities is not only technology and data manipulation, but even more, sustainability and civic engagement. And this comes from somebody who's part of an innovation hub and technology hub. This is the Porter School. I'm showing you this picture because the idea that I'm trying to present is actually within this picture. This is the only LEED Platinum building in the region, in the country, but also in the region. And yes, it's very impressive, and it was built to be so, because part of its mission and its vision is to say it can be done. This is a building that produces its own energy, that's built mostly with ecological materials, and this is a living lab. As you can see, the outer wall produces energy by using solar tubes. There's a green garden on the roof. We recycle our wastewater, etc. But I think that's interesting, but that's not the main point. The main point is that the building itself is open to experiments, is open to groups, to a dialogue with the municipality, and is serving in a very, very substantial way as a pinpoint for sustainability in the city. Experimentation, the ability to experiment, is something that we often take for granted, and cities a lot of times shirk away from experiments. It's only through experimentation that we can really advance innovation. And experimentation also entails the willingness to fail. And that's something that we need to take into account. But that is also why smaller, more modest pilots, experiments should be implemented in cities so we can learn, so we can try. I believe that, for instance, Tel Aviv and Israel can be an amazing beta site for a lot of innovations, but unfortunately, the barriers and the obstacles are still very high, and usually governments, and mostly political governments, are still hesitant in taking such steps. This is another picture. In the Porter experiment building, we're also housing the Transportation Accelerator, which is a cooperation with the government and the municipality, and its main target is to develop new ways of transportation and alternatives for fuels. This is an example for an algae lab that we're housing and experimenting with producing both food and energy from algae. And this is the food. This was the first leg of the three-pod resilience model. The second leg is the civic engagement. In most of our cities, our residents have usually become consumers. They're consumers of urban services, much less involved citizens in active city making. It is our responsibility, both as city makers and city thinkers, to develop more and more platforms and to make civic engagement accessible and attractive to our residents. It's not simple to be an active and involved citizen. You need to spend time, you need to invest, sometimes funds, and definitely put yourself out there. That's why it's our responsibility to make it easy and to make it accessible. This is the basis understanding of the Tel Aviv Smart City and Civic Engagement, which, as I said, was presented in Quito. It is based on already the existing platform of Tel Aviv, which utilizes its smart technology in order to expand and make civic engagement accessible and, as I said, simple. The 3 points of the Tel Aviv Declaration are first and foremost strategy. For civic engagement to be part of the municipal policy, it has to be mainstreamed. It has to be a central part of the city's key policies and vision, translated into tangible guidelines, operational manuals, and above all, capacity building for all city staff and stakeholders. This is not something that we should take for granted. This is something that we should invest time and attention for. This is a city-centered municipality, And once you have a strategic vision and a city-centered municipality tools and platforms, these can then be translated into accessible, wide, and tangible invitations to citizens to take part. This is one of the examples of the Tel Aviv platforms, annual roundtables in the main square of the city. More than 1,000 people participated. They were divided into different roundtables based on thematic issues of municipal life. Each table was headed by a municipal department head. All the insights, everything that was said was written down, and these department heads are accountable to the insights and the suggestions that were produced by the people who participated in these roundtables. They're continuously being published and monitored. This is just another picture of this particular event, and there are many others. The most important thing that I should stress is not the ingenuity of these platforms, but the continuity of having these discussions and these platforms. So civic engagement becomes an everyday urban practice instead of a once in 5 or 4 years elections, or worse, a protest or a demonstration. And to conclude, I'd like to come back to the basics, to the citizens themselves, to the bottom-up initiatives. We often tend to separate municipal actions and bottom-up activities. I would like to suggest that there is a new level developing, the middle-out level, the level that's often housed by change makers within municipalities, dedicated professionals who are linking the bottom-up blessed unrest together with the capabilities and accountability of the municipality. I would like to show you 3 examples from my city, Tel Aviv, that I think will explain, demonstrate this idea better. Tel Aviv has a pretty good biking scheme, which includes both about 150 kilometers of bike lanes and a bike rental scheme that you can see here. This whole initiative was initiated by a very small group of students in the mid-1990s who said, this Tel Aviv is a city that's built for biking. The weather is good, it's level, it's compact. There's no reason on earth why we cannot use bikes in Tel Aviv. It took about 5, 6, 7 years for the idea to be translated into policy, into infrastructure, and finally into this. But it did begin with a dialogue and with a civic action. Every last Friday of the month, the bikers took the street. And from that, from the critical mass of bikers on the street, the city realized that here was an opportunity to improve and better the city. And from that, it continued on within the municipality, but with continual partnership with these biking organizations. The second example is community gardens. I'm sure you've all heard or familiar with. I myself have a community garden in the neighborhood where I live in. But I think that sometimes we tend to belittle these ideas. If we look at it from a civic engagement point, these are citizens who are sharing together with the municipality the responsibility of taking care of the public space. They're putting in investment, the municipality is putting in investment, and what we have is a municipal-private partnership. In the city of Tel Aviv, there is a special dedicated person who guides the different community gardens. There are about 40 all over the city. The city supplies the water, the city supplies the tools, and obviously the land, and the residents supply the work and the enjoyment. And the last example that I'd like to share with you fits in very well with the main theme of the conference today. And it's an example of the way that citizens, and then together with the municipality, organized in order to produce an improvement to the life of some of the African refugees in the cities. The area where the African refugees are concentrated in the city is in the southern part around a very small park called Divesity. And as you can see, sometimes there are refugees that are just sleeping out on the grass, sleeping out in air bomb shelters, in very poor conditions. And a group of students that began with students, residents who were living nearby, began talking to some of the refugees, trying to assess how they could help. And among material goods and, supplying them with clothes and food and that, and a theme developed that they were also lacking in cultural amendments. And from that, the Levinsky Library, open library, evolved. This is an open library. It has books in about 30 languages. It provides storytelling for African kids in English, in French, and in Hebrew. It teaches Hebrew also. By now, it's funded by the municipality, still operated by volunteers, and definitely one of the, I think, tangible, simple, modest improvements to the very hard and frustrating life of African refugees in Tel Aviv. I hope that I've succeeded in providing, first and foremost, the concept that resilience is not necessarily just a challenge, but it's also a window of opportunity and possibly a window for optimism, because at the basis of our ability to create resilient cities is our ability to innovate, to create, and to cooperate with each other. Thank you.